All right. Happy Tuesday, everyone, and welcome back to another Learning Tech Talks, where we are exploring the landscape of learning and workplace technology, and so much more than that. Today, I'm looking forward to this. I'm going to get feisty, no doubt. I'm going to get feisty on this one because we're going to be talking about, the way I guess I'm going to put this is we're going to be talking about how to run L&D like a P&L leader and what that looks like in terms of decision-making, operational efficiency, analytics. We're going to get into some of the data and analytics behind that. And so to help me navigate that conversation, I'm joined by Patrick Flanagan from Administrate out in Bozeman, Montana. Is that not, did I get that one right?
That's right. Yeah. Thanks, Chris. Thanks for having me.
Yeah. All right. Well, I'm looking forward to this. And for those of you who are just joining, feel free to let me know who's here. I always get a chance to look afterwards, but it's always more fun during the show to see who's actually here. So feel free to comment so I can see it, and then I can call you out by name if you have questions. I promise I won't call you out as a guest unless you want me to, but I do like actually engaging with folks along the way. So as we get into this a little bit, before we get rolling, Patrick, on your end, I always find it helpful if people understand who it is that's joining me on the show. So give me a little bit of background into who is Patrick and how did you end up at Administrate?
Yeah. Thanks, Chris. I joined Administrate about 8 years ago, and I joined because I saw that they were solving the problem that I was facing in L&D, which is just kind of this operational efficiency problem, especially around kind of classroom training, but then also bringing all the data together in kind of a rich reporting aspect. So when I came across Administrate and what they were doing, I just thought, wow, this huge opportunity.
Now, was your background in training? I mean, obviously you were able to put some of the dots together.
It was it varies, but I was in operations, but I acted as an SME. So it was really tied into a lot of the just teaching classes and trying to get the reporting and see the rich analysis and being frustrated with that along with, the L&D leaders. So
you were spending time as an operations leader doing some of the delivery to help bring up folks. And then we're like, hey, okay, great. Like, how's it working? How are we doing? And it was like crickets chirping.
It was, well, we've got to pay $5,000 to get a report, and there's all this siloed data and all this stuff, and it was. So
we can get that to you in about 3 months, and we can't guarantee the accuracy or effectiveness of the data we get you. So, as a big forewarning, our data quality may not be reliable.
Exactly. Yep, you get it.
Okay.
Yep.
Okay. And so that frustrated you which understandably, I know plenty of people who are frustrated by that challenge. And so you thought, hey, I know, I'll go work for an organization that actually is doing something to help solve that problem. And how long have you been there now?
Just over 8 years. So company's headquartered in Scotland. We've got a big US presence though. And I actually moved over to Scotland for a while. I'm back in Bozeman in our office here. But we've gone through the journey, and we're really trying to solve some of that pain, and we could talk more about that.
Okay. So I guess I didn't realize that based headquartered in Scotland. Is that okay? Well, that's good to know. All right. But you're in Montana running kind of part of that, because I know there's a big office out there in Montana, which is, by the way, a nice place to have a headquarters.
It's all right.
Well, we were talking about skiing. Are you a skier or a snowboarder, by the way? I do have to ask that. It'll determine the quality of this meeting, by the way.
Yeah. We'll see what happens here. I am definitely a skier.
Okay. All right. I'll allow it.
Okay.
All right. So for those, Administrate has been on before, but it's been a while. And so there may be folks out there who are not familiar with Administrate. So I do want to make sure, just so we level set a little bit, if you've been listening thus far, you probably have some clues as to what it is as a platform. But how do you describe it? When folks say, okay, so you're in this space, and where does it fit in the ed tech category?
Yeah. So we're a training operations platform. We take a real platform approach with an API layer. We're very, we nerd out on the data for sure. And we integrate with other ed tech tools. We're kind of single source of truth, and integrate with other pieces of the organization's tech stack. And we really believe we have to do that to show return on investment into human capital and training.
Okay. So I want to get some clarity on this because, again, folks who
Yeah.
may be listening, I find a lot of practitioners in the space, especially with the ed tech market, it gets a little bit ambiguous, and certain words don't always mean. I just always think of the, Princess Bride. That doesn't mean what you think it means, type of a thing. And so to me, when I think of operations, there's multiple components to it that sometimes get confusing for folks, because there's the workflow, there's the general workflow, how work happens within your internal operations. There's the actual, flow of work type of stuff. To me, there's also some of the operations around kind of the technology delivery management. Then there was also this weird category for a bit that now is, I think, fallen off the main stage at least, but still is almost kind of been baked in. It's kind of more the LRS side of kind of just purely trying to capture all of this data, but still very narrowly when you think about it in the broader ops. Where in that spectrum, or is it all of the above?
It's a good question. So we kind of sit behind the different modals of learning. So, we sit behind e-learning, sit behind classroom, BILT, lab learning, and on the job. And we're kind of capturing the data off of those journeys, but also enabling the operational efficiency around that. And when I say that, what I mean is, every time you run a course, you've got a lot of things going on, workflow. You've got to make sure you're booking resources. You've got event scheduling. You've got communications around those events. You're doing surveys, capturing that data. And we really believe there's best in breed tools out there. And so we're not trying to do everything, but we want to connect to those best of breed tools, have that data in one spot so we can do rich reporting and analysis. Yeah.
Okay. And that helps, I think, give some additional clarity to this, because I can relate, from an L&D standpoint. This is no shortage of, like you said, there's lots of tools out there that are managing a lot of this stuff, whether it's learning content, like you said, whether it's learning the actual classes and all this stuff, but communications. But like you said, I mean, the amount of data that's created versus the amount of data we actually have access to, and do we actually know what happened with any of this stuff? Like, we say we want to get learning closer to the flow of work. We say we want to reach people where they are. We say we want to make things more relevant and accessible. Yet, in many regards, it's very much a black box in terms of that. And is that really the core of the problem that Administrate is trying to solve, is to say, hey, there's a whole bunch of this stuff. We recognize that. We're not trying to become the panacea. What we want to do is tap into those sources and say, let's help you bring that together so you can make decisions well.
Yeah, absolutely. We call ourselves learning infrastructure as well. So we're kind of the switchboard operators for all the trains running on time, that sort of thing. And so
the air traffic control.
Exactly. Yeah. So and we really believe, I'll say this quickly, but 20 years ago in marketing was a black hole until you had some of these platforms come on the scene, help with some of the operational components, but also really track your investment all the way through. So I knew if I put $1 in, I got $3 back.
Yeah, your cost. I mean, even assessing like cost per leads and like how much are we actually spending on all this? Like, is it actually converting to a sale?
So
before it was like, we don't know.
Yeah, exactly. So we think of ourselves as doing the same thing for training. Where does that investment dollar go when you're investing in a course for one of your employees? What do you get out of that? And so tracking that all the way through while we help with some of those operational efficiencies is kind of where we sit.
Okay. So in many ways, helping answer the question, here's what went into this. Did it have the desired outcome? Like, did it achieve what we really were hoping to get? And what did it cost for us to actually get to that? Is that fair?
Yeah, yeah, I think that's right. And talking about kind of like, when we say, what are you tracking or what is the ROI? What are the metrics that you need to impact in the organization, and how do you connect those dots all the way through to what you're doing? I think is a key component of that.
Okay. So let's make the transition then to this, because I think it's a natural transition point. I said in the beginning, we're going to be talking about thinking more like a P&L leader when it comes to this, which I grew up closer to the operations side of things. And there's in many ways almost a different way of looking at things when you're looking at your business or your function that way, because you have to just make a lot of these critical decisions. But saying that and doing it are two very different things. So we kind of joke backstage that there's some real opportunity for L&D to act more like a product or a P&L leader, which, by the way, if you're not familiar, P&L, profit loss, you're basically owning that. Where do you see some of the opportunities in our industry in this space? And obviously we talked a little bit about, well, in some ways when the data is a black hole, it, results in that. But what are some of the things you're seeing where we could get better at this?
Yeah, I think there's still a lot of opportunity in learning analytics space. Really thinking about, why am I taking attendance? Why am I tracking engagement? We tend to track all these things and have reports on it and that sort of stuff. But why are you doing that? And continuing to ask why all the way up the chain is one direction to go, and then understanding like, okay, then this is the actual organizational impact. The other thing I think about is, what is the organization trying to do? If they're trying to, I don't know, increase manufacturing quality, by some metric, 2% or something like that, how does L&D help with that? And how do you track all the way through to actually showing that you've had impact there? And I think, sometimes in L&D, we aren't as crisp as we could be on those metrics. And
you're very diplomatic in the way you say it. We're not terribly crisp all the time. Like, no, we honestly, if I don't know anybody in our industry that, if you're honest, maybe publicly they wouldn't do this, but if you're honest behind the scenes, they would say, no, we don't do this very well. We don't do this. And that's not a knock just on our industry. I think a lot of just organizations struggle with actually really understanding the nature of their business and understanding, okay, if we're doing this, like, how does this fit and what are we connecting to, and thinking deeply about the work that's happening. Sometimes it's just like, well, this is just kind of what happens.
Yeah.
And we're just on cruise control. And it's like, no, if you're going to think like a P&L leader, you can't be on cruise control. You have to be constantly looking at what's happening and adapting it based on the environmental changes and understanding, well, why were we doing this in the first place? So when the environment changes, you can say, we're missing the intended target now because the environment's changed. Here's, I think, a shift we need to make to actually continue down that trajectory in this new environment.
Yeah, I love that. This is stuff I love talking about, Chris. Thinking about this capital allocation, are your pieces in the right spot on the chessboard? What is actual strategy? How are we winning? How are we using the resources we have effectively, and not being afraid to change what we've been doing, the status quo, and really digging deep, like you said, and say, why are we doing this? Why am I tracking this stuff? Yeah.
Well, so on that one, and I think it's a bit of a mix, because to some degree, it's easy to say, well, we don't have the data, which is an opportunity area, which it sounds very much like we're looking at that. I'm curious, though, what other factors, and I'll weigh in on this, but I don't want to show my cards on it, because I think it's easy to point the finger at, well, it's because of this, because that feels like a very ethereal, like, oh, well, we can't get that. And so as long as I keep pointing at that, I don't really have to do it type of a thing, because I can kind of relegate why it's not happening. Are there other things that you see, though, as opportunities? Because the reality is you can always find an excuse why you can't do it. It's figuring out, well, right, but what can we do in the environment that we're in? So are there other things that you see contribute to some of this where we maybe aren't thinking deeply enough about some of this stuff?
Yeah, I could think maybe of a couple things. One would be, and this varies widely, and it's a bit of that kind of locus of control. Do I have the control to organize my tech stack and my people to design the tech stack that fits around what I'm trying to do, or
Okay.
does that sit outside of me, and do I have to fight with an IT group or whatever? And I think sometimes we can blame, organizational structure as well, and IT
Right, it's
doesn't let
another
me do
easy
that.
target that's outside. Well,
Yeah,
IT picked the system, so it's
yeah,
awful, and there's really nothing we can do about it, type of a thing. Which, again, is there
yeah,
legitimacy to it? There is legitimacy to it. I don't want to dismiss it, that's not a real
yeah.
challenge that you have to deal with. But
I
to your point, that can become an easy target.
I think it can, and I think what I would maybe encourage folks to think about, especially on the lines of the P&L. You can do anything if you can show ROI and impact to an organization. And so I think sometimes we get stuck in status quo mode or being told no, but maybe we're not presenting the right business case, or willing to think about how we should be doing that.
Which goes back to thinking like a P&L, to your point. And we're going to get to the ROI thing, because we could probably do a whole episode just on that piece.
Mm-hmm.
But your point there is, and it is something that even in my own journey, I've had to work through, where you go, I'm being told no, and I'm convinced I've told the whole story, and I'm still being told no, I'm going to throw in the towel, versus saying, I'm being told no. Why is that? Maybe the story I'm telling isn't resonating with my audience. Maybe I haven't articulated it in a way where I'm showing value they care about. I'm showing value I care about that is completely irrelevant. And I've been that person where I've been like, hey, we're going to do this and it's going to be great, and here's all the reasons. And it's like,
Yeah.
I don't really care about that, and you're like, but you should. And then we end up arguing why they should care about our reasons, instead of going, well, what doesn't matter to you, so that I can understand that and then connect the dots back to those things.
I think that's super important, and it's a level of maturity that you have to operate at, to get the things you want and to be able to make that impact.
Yeah. Okay. So let's go back to this, starting with the why thing. Because I first of all, I really like the topic, and I mean, I'm about to launch a book called Relentless Intention, which is all about this whole concept of getting down to the core of, like, why are you really even doing what you're trying to do in the first place? Because if you're not locked in on that, you just end up, flying all over the place.
Yeah.
But I am curious what you've observed and how you can do that well. Because I have seen this happen where sometimes it goes one of two ways. We either assume that the why that we get on first pass is the why, and you're like, maybe the why you're given isn't even fully thought through. You can't just take things at face value. But I've also seen the analysis paralysis kick in, where people just go deep and dig. And it's like, okay, at some point you do have to take action. You can't, because you could pontificate and sit and think through all the possibilities literally till you're 6 feet under and still not necessarily get to a conclusion. So how do you encourage people to do that well? Because I think it's really important, but how you do it, to me, matters almost as much as doing it.
Yeah, it's a good question. I think it's not easy. I think you have to start and make sure you're asking the right questions, and then you have access to the data to give you the initial answers. And so I'm pretty biased on this issue with Administrate because we have all the data now, and the where we're
Yeah.
head where we're headed now is what we call decision support. And so it's it's not me taking all the data and trying to figure out, how am I how am I supposed to bring up the right report, or how should I be thinking differently about my next year, or how am I supposed to put this complex schedule together? It takes me forever. I hate doing it. Why not have, if a system already has the data, why not kind of determine the outcomes you're looking for and have, AI or something like that figure out the optimal outcomes, if the data is already in place. Now, the rule setting, all that is very, very key on that front. But I think going back into the learning analytics, what is, I always think in the end, what are you trying to impact? And then how do you
Yeah.
bring that back? And you can look at it both ways. I think if you're assessing why am I doing the thing I'm doing, that's one way to like say, does this really make sense? I think the other thing I love to do is to say, all right, magic wand. If I was starting from scratch, how would I impact
Okay.
this organizational outcome? And then linking that all the way back, and then seeing what's the gap between that and what I'm doing today. Now,
Okay.
it's not always easy to turn all that
No,
around.
no,
So
but I think so. What's funny, there's two things that stood out to me on that resonate very deeply. So the first one really is um, that point of like, why are we doing this? Sometimes one of the common missteps I see happen is we stop short on that one. So we're okay with, just as, I mean, again, if we're going to take an L&D example, maybe it'll be one of these like, oh, we need to improve our onboarding process. Why? Well, because it's not very good. And it's like, that's not the why. I mean, it is a why, but it's not
mhm.
really the why. Like, it's about going deeper and thinking deeply about,
Yeah,
right, but like, what if we fix it? Like, why is that a good thing? Why do we care whether the onboarding process is better? Well, it improves employee experience. Okay, but why does that matter? Why, who cares if we
yeah,
improve the employee experience? Like, well, why is that a good? Well, and this can be really frustrating for people. So I will be the first to say I've had many conversations with stakeholders over the years who do get frustrated with me sometimes because I'm relentlessly curious in the space of like, right, but why do you
yeah,
even care about that? What if we
yeah,
fix that? What's that going to change? Or what do you think it's going to change? And they're like,
yeah,
just do it. And it's like, no, but this is a really important exercise to dig into some of
yeah,
those things, to deeply understand the interconnectedness, the complexity of like, oh, okay, so this ties to that. And if we can fix this and that. And what I've found, going back to the time thing, is this doesn't have to be a 9-month analysis that you have
yeah,
to do. You can do this in a 30-minute conversation, depending on how well the person you're talking to actually understands their business. It doesn't have to
yeah.
be some endless thing.
Yeah, and I think it's okay to not know the answer. Keep going after those whys and figure out is it related to ROI, or is it because it's somebody else's objective and it's making their life easier, and why does that matter? And actually getting deeper in the business, you're talking about onboarding. Well, great employee experience, getting them tied into the organization. What's the cost of employee turnover? It's huge, right?
Right.
So
Speed to
400%,
performance, how
something like
quickly can they
that.
be doing their
Yeah,
job effectively? Like you accelerate that,
yeah,
you dramatically impact return to the organization. I mean, there's tons of this stuff when you actually start digging into it.
yeah. And I think, we just had something internally, where it was, one of our leaders was like, I need more help in this area, and I need more resource. Okay, well, why? And having to take that down, it wasn't an L&D function, it was a CS function, but actually saying, okay, well, how are our CSMs scored? What's the impact to the organization? how do we know that we need that individual and that we're ultimately going to get a return on that
Yeah.
investment? I think you have to look at that, across every function.
Well, and this goes back to being a good P&L leader. This is what the best P&L leaders I've ever worked under do really well. They
Hmm.
deeply try and understand the interconnectedness of things, and they ask these really thoughtful questions to try and understand, okay, but right, if we make that change, how is that improving things? And also, how are we making sure that that doesn't break something else that actually, because you see this happen where you're like, hey, yay, we fixed this. And then it's like, oh, shoot, but we broke these 9 things over here, which actually, when you're carrying a P&L, you think about this stuff a whole lot more because you're like, that's great if we made an investment and we bumped growth up 10 points. Oh,
Yeah.
but the cost over here ended up costing us 10 times more. So actually, overall, we lost money on what seemed like a really good win.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. I could go in a few directions here, Chris, but yeah, I think CFOs, I heard a term recently. They're called CF knows, and you're told no a lot, but if you can put it in their terms and they can see why we would do something, you get the yes. And so I think that's a piece. Just thinking about what you said there, I think uh, the strategy and why are we doing something? Why is this going to make an impact? And making sure that you don't put that out of balance. Like you said,
Right.
salespeople want to sell a lot of things. Manufacturers want to have quality and a smooth ride, and they want to produce and hit their numbers. They don't necessarily want to turn the dials up, if it
Right.
impacts quality and that sort of thing. So you gotta keep all that in balance.
Yeah, and I think that's just one of those areas. Part of digging into that why, well, and I guess this is one of the risks we can operate on in L&D is we can assume that our stakeholders have already thought this through. And this was one of the biggest things early in my career that I had to flip the script on was we can't operate under the assumption that, well, they asked for us to do something, so they must have clearly thought through all of this. So we're in a position to just execute against it. And we shouldn't ask these deeper questions because some of the most effective conversations I've had with stakeholders have been when we dig into this and they go, shoot, right? I didn't think about these other things. And now we're a partner working through this together and going, okay, so what if we do something like this? And it doesn't have to stop you from experimenting. To your point earlier, that it's like, it doesn't mean you don't do anything till you figure out all the chess plays. It's about saying,
Yeah.
let's get to a healthy level of risk assessment where we can go, but what if we tried this? We think there's enough evidence to justify that. And then let's see what happens, assess it, and then go from there.
Yeah. And I clocked something you said there too. I think being asked to do something, always thinking of yourself in a receptive and reactive state is also maybe a concern. I think as a leader, you need to be on the proactive stance. You need to know what you're going to do, where you're going, how you would impact an organizational outcome from your end, or you're always going to be in that reactive state. You're never going to have the control you want. And I think, being a P&L leader is not only balancing your budget, but also knowing what investments do I need to make and what's going to be the return from that, and be in that proactive stance. That's going to get you respect, and that's going to get you where
It
you
does.
want to go. And it's a much more comfortable state to be in than always just fighting fires or that reactive
Right.
stance. Yeah.
And that's a skill. Going back to starting with the why and some of these things we're talking about is that's a skill you build over time because essentially you're trying to play chess 10 steps ahead. You're trying to think, what are the things
Yeah.
that are in front instead of going, well, shoot, they just put my queen in checkmate. How do I rally my pieces? And it's like, well, it's kind of too late because you're in checkmate versus,
Yeah.
all right, if I think about the next 10 moves they might make, how could I potentially position my pieces to be in front of that?
Yeah. And I think, sometimes we're thinking in terms of, month or quarter. But if you're not in this
versus
proactive,
year.
yeah. And if you're not in a proactive stance, if a COVID comes along or something hits
You're
you, you
dead.
may be stuck in that checkmate for 2-3 years,
That's just
at
it.
least. Yeah.
No, that's such a good point, because I think sometimes where we see this, when we think about trying to be more proactive and, things like that, your point is spot on, where sometimes we're trying to think, ahead to the next quarter or the next couple months versus what are we going to do to be prepared for 3 years from now? I just think where I was when COVID hit, for us, it almost impacted us not at all, because we were like, well, we know this is the way work is moving. And so we have to basically be able to prepare for what this is. So when it hit, it was like, right, we have to flip a couple switches and there you go. And back to work type of a thing. But that's not easy to do, especially in the volatile environment that's moving as quickly as it is, which then ties to what my next question is, or kind of the topic we'll get into. Making those decisions, if everything we just said is like, that sounds great, that sounds impossible. And for some folks, it can feel like, wow, you want me to play 5 years ahead? I feel like I can't even think through tomorrow, before the end of the day type of a thing. How is technology and things that you're doing, especially around the L&D space, helping with that decision support? Because really what we're talking about is mitigating risk, anticipating change, and making decisions around that. And the way you do that is by having, some of it's just skill and experience, but some of it's data helping inform you and seeing what's around the corner. So what are some of the ways that, what we've been talking about and how Administrate's helping support some of that?
Yeah. Good question. Sometimes I think about this kind of like a business coach, which is, where is your time being allocated? If you were to look at your calendar for the last month, where is that time being allocated? And if you were going to create the ideal future calendar, what would that look like? What are the gaps? What are you spending tons of time on that's not high value? A simple, very simple one that we kind of solved early on at Administrate was just communications going out and making sure you had really rich communications with merge fields that had all the data you needed. And some people, in L&D, you see some like mail merge geniuses, but they can only get to a certain level. And you really need a system that can, set up once and then just take care of that ongoing. So, clearing that out is one example. I think I mentioned to you, Chris, we're coming out with what we call our scheduler feature. We've always been able to help create schedules, but we're looking into decision support because so many of our L&D leaders spend so much time on their schedules, and sometimes they're so complex that as humans, we're just trying to get to something that works. And as soon as we get to something that works, we stop and we say, that's it, launch it. And what happens when you have, a divestiture or an acquisition, or you have, people leave the team, and then it's like,
I was going to say, somebody calls in sick or quits or whatever. And you're like, oh no, we never thought of this one.
Yeah, exactly. So, this is a problem. And some teams spend like 6 weeks coming up their schedule for the year, and then, something breaks it. And we really
they have to add a new class into the schedule, and it's like,
exactly.
What?
So when we were thinking like, what is the next best thing that we can help folks with? It was this. And we had all the data anyway. We're already producing schedules. Let's add an AI component that comes up with 20,000 schedules per second. And, so it's coming up with all these things that work and then optimizing for an outcome. So that could be instructor utilization or cost or some other business outcome that you're trying to go towards. And as humans, it just takes a lot of brain power that we shouldn't need to use if there's something out there that can be doing that for us. And so giving options to us, and then as soon as you have something that breaks that schedule, just being able to say, hey, fix this for me, and then it's fixed. And that's something that takes a
Yeah.
lot of time away that you don't need to be doing, and can let you get on with some high value work.
Well, and going back to the intersection, because this is a popular topic, is like, how is AI, where does AI fit into this mix? And what you just described, I mean, I still remember back in the days, I don't do it, I've since live delivery is not as prominent in my space as it has been in the past. But I remember early in my days where live, I worked for a company once where we had trainers that would go on site to clients. And I remember the planning and time that went into, okay, we've got these people, we've got these customers, they need these people and the weeks of like, okay, what are our blackout dates? And I mean, it was an administrative nightmare going through trying to do this. And then to your point, something changes. Oh no, this trainer quit. And now we've got a new person coming in, but they're not going to be skilled to go to these clients yet. It consumed massive amounts of non-value added time. And that's something that, to your point, AI can very quickly say, well, let me quickly calculate, like, what are the 100 different possibilities of how you do this? And then like Waze, go, okay, well, that changed. Let's redirect you around this, which would have historically taken weeks of, well, we got to blow the whole calendar up and start back over because this whole thing got screwed up.
Yeah, and back to your point on like how do you carve out this high value proactive time? I think it's really looking into that future calendar. How much time should I be spending on analysis? Forward thinking. Maybe that's 40%, and you say, okay, I'm going to allocate that 40%. That's a forcing function to make you look at the rest of the stuff that has to go within that 60%. And then say, usually the quick answer is, oh, that's impossible. But if you can break down each,
I'm too busy, right? That's right. I mean, honestly, that's like, I'm just too busy for that. And it's like, well, you're too busy for the things that you don't prioritize. Yes, that's true.
Right. Yeah. So if you can then take that glut of stuff you're doing every day and you break it down into chunks and you say, all right, what's out there to solve this? All right, I'm going to bring in a piece of tech to solve this. And at the same time, I'm going to make sure that connects to my other piece of tech so that I'm already grabbing some analysis out of that. And I don't have to do the spreadsheet or the footwork in between those two things, And so you're thinking about your tech stack in a smarter way already, solving problems and conforming to how you want to run the business. I worked for a CEO quite a while ago, but one of the best things he told me one time was, don't ever configure your business to a piece of software. Make sure it's the other way around. And, make sure you build that tech stack. And, 15 years ago, that was hard. Today, it's not. There's a lot of interoperability, extensibility between these tools. You just have to think about it the right way. Sometimes you need some help consulting on the architecture. That's okay. But you can really enable yourself to be doing this high value work and offloading a lot of this onto technology now.
So I want to get to this integration piece because I think this is a really important piece, but I also want to highlight something that you said there that jumped out to me, which goes back to, and this is the core of some of this stuff, is you talked about being able to make some of these critical decisions. You need to, technology can absolutely help. But if you don't fundamentally understand your business, and when I say your business as an L&D leader, your business is L&D. Like if you don't understand the complexity and the interconnectedness of, okay, how do these pieces work and how do these functions tie together and how do these hand off? Technology is only going to do so much for you. If anything, it's only going to accelerate the problems that you have. Your dumpster fire is going to turn into a forest fire because it's going to be like, well, yeah, you sped things up, but you didn't even fundamentally understand how things worked in the first place. You just accelerated a lot of the problems that you already had. Now, granted, can it help mitigate some of those? Sure. But I mean, is that fair to say because that's been my experience, is a lot of times we look to technology to be the solution instead of saying, you got to figure out your core. It has to be one and then the other. You can do them in parallel, but if you're just like, well, I'm sure what we're doing is fine, let's just throw some tech at it. I have not seen that go in a happy direction very often.
It's usually a disaster. Yeah.
I was trying to be as diplomatic as you were earlier on in the show about it, to try and be like, well, I mean, I can think of one time where it kind of didn't scorch the earth, but I mean, for the most part, that's just what happens. It burns the earth.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think, if you're adding an attendance tracker or something like that, that doesn't have to be a big problem. But if you're really thinking like, how does the core of this operate and function, and how am I capturing, what I need to do rich analysis, and how do all these things interplay? We'll get the integrations here, but I think if you're thinking add-on for a lot of these systems, like a lot of people, we've seen over the years, is like, my LMS isn't working for me, I'm going to go out and look for another LMS, and that's going to fix it. But they haven't done, what do I do at the core here? They haven't done the business analysis. And I would say it's probably very difficult. Most L&D leaders that we talk to have not done the magic wand greenfield approach. They've come in, they've inherited somebody else's system that is like, Frankenstein, over the last 20 years of, different components, wired together with whatever. Duct
tape and paper clips.
And what we like to say is, you need to straighten out the spaghetti before you get that, you start buying tech. If you look at some of these workflows, it's workaround on top of workaround on top of workaround, and you've got a bowl of spaghetti. You don't have nice straight lines, and you got to do that first. And this can take years, but it will pay off. And I think also it doesn't have to take years, and you do need to think about, like, what is that locus of control and how do I take ownership of it?
I really love that you brought that up. I mean, this is, over the years, this is the part that nobody really likes to talk about, because it doesn't preach well at the conferences, right? This isn't the kind of stuff that makes the main stage.
Yeah.
Where it's like, so what did you do? Is you kicked off your, organizational transformation. I dug into the spaghetti and I straightened the spaghetti. Like, nobody's like, yeah, woo. Like, that's not, but that's, to your point, that's where historically my experience has been, time and time again, when I take the time to go, this is not the fun part. This is not the fun part. We are going to unpack this spaghetti and go, this is broken. This doesn't make sense. We've got to get this out. We've got to do this. Then we can layer on, how do we optimize? And I think the point that I would add as kind of a nuance to that is, just because you're doing that, to the point you made, does that have to take years? The whole thing doesn't. In my opinion, it's actually never done. I think, going back to something you said earlier, where we have this idea, like, once we've arrived at nirvana, we don't have to do it anymore. It's like, no, this is just part of the way you should be working. This constant iteration of, okay, that was working last year, now it's not. The spaghetti got tangled. We need to go back. We need to revisit the spaghetti and straighten it out, type of a thing. And it just becomes part of the way you work, instead of this like 3-year exercise. We're going to go behind the curtain and then ta-da, and then we get to move on. And I think something else you said is, there are things you can do along the way. It doesn't have to be, we accomplish nothing until that's done. It's like, well, no, there are things you can do as you go, as you are straightening the spaghetti out.
Yeah. And I think that's a really good point. We sometimes, we'll have folks come to us and say, okay, we're going to bring in Administrate, and we've got these 11 integrations we want to bring into it before we go live. And we sometimes will back up and say, okay, what's your plan? What does the ultimate architecture look like here? And sometimes we'll say, you know what, let's take these three things, let's go live with them. And then maybe some of this work is a little bit manual, but maybe we actually figure out what the core business needs are, and get a little bit of learning through that manual work. And
Yep.
then we say, okay, then let's put together the integration versus, hey, I already know because I'm all knowing and I'll wire up some stuff and I'm sure the data will be perfect, moving back and forth. The problem is you get all 11 things integrated and then you realize, wow, we left a lot of things out here or we didn't
Well, and you end up
quite
making another
serve
ball
the
of
business
spaghetti.
need. You
You
do.
end up making
Yeah.
another ball of spaghetti. You're like, hey, great, let's hook all this stuff up. And then you're like, oh, shoot, now it's broken, but we don't even know where
Yeah.
because we threw so much stuff into it that now this whole thing's a mess. And we just moved our mess from one box to another instead of saying, like you said, hey, these three, we got these lines straight. Let's move those over here. And then let's figure out, well, this is messy and yeah, it's tedious, but we're going to work through it. And then as we get there, we'll continue moving things over.
Yeah.
So
You
go for
mentioned
it.
something. I'll just say one more thing. I think, in terms of managing the business, you got to be really diligent on making sure that you don't start to have some of that spaghetti tangle. And the way that spaghetti starts to tangle, I think, Chris, is all of our people are excellent and they're trying to do the right thing and get to an
Yes.
outcome. But sometimes they feel like they don't have the power to change something. So then what happens? A workaround comes up, a spreadsheet is born, and all of a sudden you don't know that. And then, maybe months in, you're like, whoa, what is
Right.
this spreadsheet? How this is not the direction we were headed towards. And so there is that learning analytics, there's the teaching your whole group to think a certain way and to say, we're going to have straight lines. We're going to really work on this together. And if you guys see a need, let's surface that and talk about it. And, how
Yeah.
are we going to think about this long term? And
And
like you said,
the stuff
it's
we're
never
talking
done.
about, well, and the thing is, this is big. Like what we're talking about right now is not something you like show up at a team meeting and go, hey, everybody, like, here's what we're going to do now. And it's fixed because
Yeah.
these are big. You're talking organizational trust. A lot of times the reason people don't bring things up is because they don't have trust that anybody cares or is going to listen, or they're just going to be told we don't have time for that type of a thing. So there's some real, even just people stuff that you have to work through to say, all right, how do we build an organization that can do this well? And it's not that you can't ever have workarounds. That's something that I would just add, and I'm thinking you would agree with me on this. It's not that you can't ever have workarounds. It's that you're doing those workarounds and they're being done intentionally with the goal of saying, we're doing it now to perfect it so that it can be corrected. It's not that you say,
100%.
we'll never do a workaround, because sometimes you need to do a workaround, but you should know about it and be looking to fix it.
Intentional about it. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Totally agree with that point. Yeah.
This is big. This is big stuff. I told you I was going to get animated in this one. So, so let's talk about the integration piece, because this is one that, especially as we talk about the tech piece, I have seen people underestimate what that is. And to some degree, the vendor community has contributed to this, because again, the word integration means a lot of different things to a lot of different people. And a lot of people are not super tech savvy. So when they ask, oh, do you integrate? Sure. And it's like, well, yeah, but what does that actually look like? Because integration is not necessarily just this one like plug and play type of a thing where it's a yes, no question. So I am curious, how are you navigating that space? Because I have no doubt there is no shortage of challenge around this, not only because not all integrations are created equal, and the nuance of what people need to integrate with and what data they need to pull. Not only is that nuanced, but then on top of it, I would say this has gotten much, much better in the last 5 years. But historically, sometimes vendors didn't always want to integrate because it was like, well, we don't want our data going to someone else. We want to try and create our own panacea type of a thing. And the thought that you're going to take things elsewhere, that's uncomfortable. Like I said, I think we've gotten way better in the tech market around this, but there's no shortage of challenges.
Yeah, I think integrations can be a very scary word, and you can think about, how, oh great, how long is that going to take? Who do, how do how do I get the resource here? How do I get the budget? It doesn't have to be that way anymore.
Okay.
I think, especially with modern SaaS products, especially, just understand that they've got to have that connectivity. We have a full API. We have a learner data model at Administrate, but even that can be a little daunting. We have a developer portal, and you can grab any piece of data, any field, anything you want in Administrate, and that is super powerful, but it can also be a little scary,
Terrifying to people. Oh, it can be
Yeah.
terrifying, especially because a lot of L&D teams have not had this skill set in their
Yeah.
team. This is a new capability that I would say most of the L&D orgs I talk to have not built this kind of internal skill and capability so they hear this and it's like, oh no, that's like IT
Yeah.
or consultants type of a thing. We
Yeah.
don't play in that space, and it's frightening.
Yeah, and we've certainly recognized this, and there are L&D teams that have their own developers, but even then, you want to make this easy. And we think about it in terms of like recipes. So if you need to integrate Administrate to an LMS or an HRIS, here's the recipe you use every time.
Okay.
So you're going to get these fields and that sort of thing. And there's iPaaS solutions out there that are making this a lot easier. So integration platform as a service, and some
Is that
of these
like
are,
I think I know some of these things. Gosh,
yeah.
what's
So
the
like Workato, Boomi, MuleSoft is the kind of the Salesforce
yeah.
one.
But
Anyway,
I use some of these too, where like it passes information from like my Squarespace over to like this type of a thing, and you just do these plug and play type integrations.
That's right.
Pre-integrated, and it's just you're basically queuing it, going, I want this information and this information and this information triggered based on this event to feed over here type of a thing.
Yeah, and so that's exactly what it is. So, and a lot of it is no code anymore. So it's I've got these fields on Administrate, and I've got these fields over here on an LMS. These are what I need to map together, and it sounds scary. It's not as scary as it used to be at all. And they're easy to use. A lot of companies like us are trying to make sure that we work well with these solutions and provide the ability to have those drop downs of fields and say map it together. And you would
kind of giving it the feel. I remember the word now, Zapier, right?
Oh,
like that kind of feel. But is that the kind of feel that you're trying to get it? Yep. Very small one, but that kind of concept of trying to help people understand, like, how are you passing data from one source to another?
Yeah, and you totally can surprise yourself with what you're able to do without a background in IT if those recipes are there and you can follow a guide. And that's on us as tech solution leaders to make sure that's available and easy to use. So we see the need there and are definitely working in that direction as well.
Okay. And like I said, I will say credit. I think sometimes the industry is hard on the vendor community, but this is an area I've seen tremendous growth from the vendor community, is saying, listen, like, we recognize we can't ever be the one solution, the Highlander of ed tech. We just can't.
Yeah.
And so we know this is a reality of our customers, that they are using these different solutions, and there's greater value in the information being shared and moved around than there is in trying to battle that off. And so I've seen that tremendously. And to your point, even my experience, for the folks who aren't super tech savvy, it is possible to pick some of this stuff up, and it is becoming much easier than it used to be able to go through this stuff. So I think I've been in conversations where people are still operating off 20-year-old intel on what integrations look like. And it's come a long way in terms of what that looks like to say, hey, we just need to connect these two systems and we only need this data, not all this data. How do we actually pass that through? And it's much easier than it was before.
Yeah, definitely. And I would say too, as learning leaders, there's folks in your team too. You give them the high level, what you're trying to achieve, and give them a little challenge to say, hey, do we have the right tech? And do you think you could wire this up, using one of these solutions? And some of these solutions are pretty cheap. And technology, like you said, has come a long ways. So there, you may not have that person, with that title in your team, but
you have somebody with that desire and skill set. That's the thing that I've seen over the years. Yeah. And this goes back to, as a P&L leader, knowing your business is also knowing your people and the team that you have, because the reality is what you said is spot on. Over the years, have I always had the role in my team that did this?
Yeah.
No, I haven't always had that luxury, because some companies just operate differently. But have I always had someone on the team who is kind of that really technical person that really always was up for a challenge and kind of trying to solve some of these problems and figuring it out? And they were the person that would do this for fun anyway, that you're like, hey, you know what if we like upskill and help this person? And also, it just, again, going back to career development and career mobility within your org, knowing how to run your business well, like these are really powerful, important things that you can do. Because sometimes I'll get, well, I don't have enough headcount on my team to hire a developer. Okay. Do you have instructional designers? Well, yeah. I mean, do you have, you've got to have that one on your team that is unusually technically savvy and they like geeking out on this. They love playing with triggers and variables and storyline. I guess I do. Right. Like, okay, that person, talk to them about doing some of this stuff. They will actually love getting into some of these things, but you've got to know your team and know where those people are. Because if you don't, it's like, well, then you can't run your business well.
Yeah. Or who's amazing at doing workarounds? Who am I always finding that's like,
right. Who's the person that you're always frustrated with because you're like, good grief, can you not keep working around the system? Lean into it.
Let's enable this person a little.
I mean, over the years, like some of the most counterintuitive lessons in running a team, like sometimes the laziest people, and I don't mean in a bad way, like they don't do their work, but the folks that are always trying to like figure out how to cut corners. Yes, it can be a bad thing, but it also can be a really powerful thing, because you lean into that person and be like, listen, I know you're constantly looking for the shortest path between point A and point B.
Yeah. Help
us find those paths. And they'll do it, like, because they're not really lazy in the sense of that. They're like, well, I hate wasting time. I mean, I was that person. I'm like, I love working. I just hate wasting time on stupid stuff.
Exactly.
This was great. Well, hopefully for those of you watching and listening, you got something out of this, and it challenged your thinking a little bit around what it means to run your business differently and the role technology plays in that, but also the role you play in that, because this isn't just a technology play. This is truly a people, a technology, and a business play. So Patrick, thank you so much for being here. This was a blast. I really enjoyed the conversation.
Yeah, thanks, Chris. Loved it. Yeah, let's do it again.
All right, for sure. Well, thanks everybody, and have a great rest of your week.